January 30th, 1649. London is freezing. The streets are silent. Thousands of people stand packed together outside the banqueting house at Whitehall, barely breathing. On a scaffold draped in black, a man kneels and places his neck on a block. He is not a criminal. He is not a traitor. He is the King of England. And the man who put him there is watching. His name is Oliver Cromwell. He is a farmer's son from Huntingdon. He has no royal blood, no family title, no formal military training. And he has just done something no one in 1,000 years of English history had dared to do. He killed a king. Not in battle, not in secret, in public, on purpose, as a statement. Today we are telling the real story of Oliver Cromwell, the soldier who came from nowhere, built the most feared army England had ever seen, overthrew his own government, executed a sitting monarch, and then ruled the entire country with an iron fist. And what history remembers most is not just what he did, it's that no one saw him coming. To understand how extraordinary Cromwell's rise was, you have to understand where he started. In 1640, Oliver Cromwell was 41 years old. He was a minor country gentleman from the east of England, a farmer managing land that had been in his family for decades. He had been a member of Parliament briefly in the 1620s, said almost nothing of note, and had largely disappeared from public life. He was in debt. He had suffered years of what he himself described as spiritual crisis, a crippling darkness of the soul that left him convinced he was damned. He drank too much. He was known among his neighbors, but certainly not feared. Nobody in England in 1640 would have looked at Oliver Cromwell and seen the future. But England in 1640 was about to tear itself apart. King Charles I had been ruling for 15 years without calling Parliament. He had taxed the country without consent, arrested opponents without trial, and made it dangerously clear that he believed God had placed him above the law. When Charles finally called Parliament again in 1640, it was not out of goodwill. He needed money to fight a war in Scotland. Parliament refused, and the argument that followed would end in civil war. When the fighting started in 1642, Cromwell raised a small troop of cavalry from his home county, 60 horsemen. That was it. Within 2 years, he would be the most important military commander in England. What made Cromwell dangerous was not instinct alone, it was discipline. He had studied the military manuals coming out of the 30 Years' War on the continent. He had read how the Swedish king Gustavus Adolphus had transformed cavalry from a slow, heavy charge into a fast, tight, controlled weapon. He applied those lessons himself. But what truly separated Cromwell from every other commander of his era was what he demanded of his men off the battlefield. His soldiers did not drink to excess. They did not plunder civilians. They prayed, they drilled, they showed up on time, and they followed orders without question. In an era when most armies were glorified mobs with flags, Cromwell's cavalry was something closer to a machine. His opponents called them the Ironsides. They meant it as mockery. Cromwell wore it as a badge. At the Battle of Marston Moor in 1644, the largest battle ever fought on English soil, Cromwell's cavalry shattered the Royalist horse, and then, crucially, did something almost no cavalry in history had done before. They stopped, they regrouped, and they turned back to attack the Royalist infantry from the rear. Most cavalry in this period charged, won or lost, and then kept riding until they were off the battlefield entirely. Cromwell's men came back. The Royalists lost 4,000 men that day. The north of England fell to Parliament within weeks. By 1645, Parliament created the new model army, a professional national fighting force built largely around Cromwell's principles. He was appointed Lieutenant General of Horse. The Civil War was effectively over. What happened next is where history gets uncomfortable. By 1647, the Royalists had been defeated. King Charles I was a prisoner. Most of Parliament simply wanted to negotiate a settlement, restore the monarchy with limits, and go back to some version of normal life. Cromwell himself had tried that. He had negotiated with Charles personally. He had believed, briefly, that a constitutional arrangement was possible. Charles destroyed that belief himself. While under house arrest, the king secretly negotiated with Scotland to invade England on his behalf. He was still talking peace with Parliament while planning a second war behind their backs. When the Second Civil War broke out in 1648, and Cromwell had to lead his army north again to crush it, something shifted permanently inside him. He became convinced that Charles Stuart was not a misguided king who could be reformed. He was a man of blood, and in Cromwell's deeply Puritan worldview, God was demanding an answer. In December 1648, Cromwell's soldiers physically removed 186 members of Parliament who opposed a trial of the king. What remained, 46 MPs, became known as the Rump Parliament. They passed the legislation needed to put Charles on trial. The charge was treason against his own people. Charles refused to enter a plea. He refused to even acknowledge the court's right to try him. He was right, in a strict legal sense. No court in history had ever tried a sitting English monarch. That was exactly the point. On January 30th, 1649, Charles I was beheaded outside his own palace. Cromwell had signed the death warrant. His signature is still visible on the document today. The crowd that witnessed the execution did not cheer. A reporter present that day wrote that as the axe fell, the crowd made a sound he had never heard before and never wanted to hear again. A single, collective groan. With the king dead, England was now a republic. The Commonwealth, they called it. And Cromwell was its most powerful man. What followed was some of the most brutal campaigning of the entire era. In 1649, Cromwell led the parliamentary army into Ireland. The Irish had supported Charles, and now they would pay. At the sieges of Drogheda and Wexford, Cromwell's forces massacred the garrisons after they had surrendered or were in the process of surrendering. At Drogheda alone, approximately 3,500 soldiers and civilians were killed. Cromwell justified it as God's judgment on those who had fought against Parliament. He also justified it strategically, arguing that swift, overwhelming brutality would end the war faster and ultimately save more lives. The Irish did not agree. His name is still spoken with bitterness in Ireland today, nearly 4 centuries later. Then he turned to Scotland, which had declared the dead king's son as Charles II. 2 campaigns, 2 crushing English victories. By 1651, Scotland was under military occupation. Oliver Cromwell had conquered the entire British Isles. No one had done that since the Romans. In 1653, Cromwell did something that would have been unthinkable when he first rode into battle with 60 horsemen. He dissolved Parliament. He walked into the chamber personally, looked at the assembled MPs, and told them, quite simply, that they had sat long enough. His soldiers cleared the building. The Parliament that had started the Civil War, that had put the king on trial, that had built the Republic, was removed by the man it had made general. England was now governed by one man. They gave him the title, Lord Protector of the Commonwealth. But the reality was simpler than any title. Oliver Cromwell, the farmer from Huntingdon, was ruling England as a military dictator. He divided the country into 11 regions, each governed by a major general, one of his trusted military commanders. He banned horse racing. He closed the theaters. He restricted Christmas celebrations, which he considered a Catholic excess. The Puritan Republic he had dreamed of during those dark spiritual years of his middle age was finally here. It was not popular. In 1657, Parliament offered him the crown. The ultimate irony. The man who had killed a king was being invited to become one himself. He refused. He agonized over it for weeks. He prayed. He consulted his generals. In the end, he could not reconcile becoming the very thing he had destroyed. He remained Lord Protector. In the summer of 1658, Cromwell's health collapsed. He had been worn down by years of campaigning, of governing, of holding together a republic that most of the country resented in private, even if they feared it in public. He suffered from malaria and kidney disease, likely made worse by the grief of losing his daughter Elizabeth, who died shortly before him. On September 3, 1658, the anniversary of his greatest military victories at Dunbar and Worcester, Oliver Cromwell died. He was 59 years old. England grieved publicly, or at least performed grief. Within 2 years, the republic he had built had collapsed entirely. His son Richard, who briefly succeeded him, resigned after 9 months. Parliament recalled Charles II from exile in France. The monarchy was restored, and then England took its revenge. In January 1661, 3 years after Cromwell's death, his body was exhumed from Westminster Abbey. He was subjected to a posthumous execution on the anniversary of the day King Charles I had been beheaded. His corpse was displayed in chains. His head was cut off and placed on a spike outside Westminster Hall, where it remained for over 20 years until a storm finally blew it down. The head of Oliver Cromwell, the man who had remade England, passed through private hands for nearly 3 centuries before being quietly buried at his old college in Cambridge in 1960. History has never agreed on Oliver Cromwell. It never will. To some, he is the father of British democracy, the man who proved, for the first time, that a king could be held accountable, the military genius who built a professional army from nothing and used it to reshape an entire civilization. To others, he is a war criminal, a hypocrite who destroyed Parliament to save it, a religious fanatic who drowned Ireland in blood and replaced a monarchy with something far more authoritarian. Both versions are true. That is what makes him extraordinary. He came from nothing. He had no training, no title, no obvious greatness. He taught himself to be a soldier. He taught himself to be a statesman. He failed repeatedly, collapsed into depression, faced disgrace and debt, and kept going. And at 41, an age when most men of his era were winding down, he started a war. He fought it. He won it. He killed a king, and then he became what he had fought against. That contradiction is the story. It is what drove the English Civil War, what drives arguments about power and accountability still today, and what makes Oliver Cromwell one of the most fascinating and unsettling figures in the history of warfare. You cannot understand the modern world without understanding this man. If this story hit you, subscribe and leave a comment below. Do you think Cromwell was a hero, a tyrant, or something in between? See you in the next one.